Our reading today comes from the poet Richard Ricardo Blanco. And this poem was written for the 57th presidential inauguration in 2013. The poem is called One Today. Some of you may know it. But perhaps you might like to close your eyes and just visualize all of the extraordinary images he brings to mind. One sun rose on us today, kindled over our shores, peeking over the Smokies, greeting the faces of the Great Lakes, spreading a simple truth across the Great Plains, then charging across the Rockies. One light, waking up rooftops under each one, a story told by our silent gestures moving behind windows. My face, your face, millions of faces and mornings mirrors, each one yawning to life, crescendoing into our day, pencil yellow school buses, the rhythm of traffic lights, fruit stands, apples, limes and oranges arrayed like rainbows, begging our praise. Silver trucks, heavy with oil or paper, bricks or milk, teeming over highways alongside us on our way to clean tables or ring up groceries as my mother did for 20 years so I could write this poem. All of us, as vital as the one light we move through. The same light on blackboards with lessons for the day, equations to solve, history to question, or atoms imagined that I have a dream speech. We keep dreaming. We keep dreaming of the impossible vocabulary of sorrow that won't explain the empty desks of 20 children marked absent today and forever. Many prayers, one light, breathing color into stained glass windows, life into the faces of statues, warmth onto the steps of our museums and park benches as mothers watch children slide into the day. One ground, our ground, rooting us to every stalk of corn, every head of wheat, sown by sweat and hands. Hands gleaning coal or planting windmills in deserts and hilltops that keep us warm, hands digging trenches, rooting cables and pipes. Hands as worn as my father's cutting sugar cane, so my brother and I could have books and shoes. The dust of farm and desert, cities and plains, mingled by one wind, our breath. Breathe. Hear it through the day's gorgeous din of honking cabs, buses launching down avenues, the symphony of footsteps, guitars, and screeching subways. The unexpected songbird on your clothesline. Hear squeaky playground swings, trains whistling, or whispers across cafe tables. Hear the doors we opened for each other all day, saying, hello, shalom, buongiorno, howdy, namaste, or buenos dias, in the language my mother taught me, every language, spoken into one wind, carrying our lives without prejudice, as these words break from my lips. One sky, the Appalachians and Sierras claimed their majesty, and the Mississippi and Colorado worked their way to the sea. Thank the work of our hands, weaving steel into bridges, finishing one more report for the boss on time, stitching another wound or uniform. The first brush stroke on a portrait of the last floor on the Freedom Tower, jutting into a sky that yields to our resistance and resilience. One sky toward which we sometimes lift our eyes, tired from work, some days guessing at the weather of our lives, some days giving thanks for a love that loves you back. Sometimes praising a mother who knew how to give or forgiving a father who couldn't give you what you wanted. We head home with a gloss of rain, a weight of snow, with a plum blush of dusk, but always home, always under one sky, our sky. And always one moon like a silent drum tapping on every rooftop, every window of one country, all of us, facing the stars, hope, a new constellation waiting for us to map it, waiting for us to name it together. When I was in seminary, I had the incredible opportunity to travel with a group of fellow students to Egypt. We called it our cross-cultural, and it was a requirement for retirement. Yeah, right. We wish! It was a requirement to graduate. Now, this, as I've shared with you probably, this was a Christian, and is a Christian seminary. So we spent much of our time in Egypt visiting the very, very ancient monasteries of the desert fathers and mothers. But that's a story for another time. The story I want to tell you is this, that as much as we were warned, don't talk to the natives. Of course we all did. And every time I would ask someone, how are you? They would say something like this. Well, my son is having trouble in school, and I'm worried about him. I don't know what to do to get him. And, you know, my wife is preparing a really fantastic dinner. My brothers are doing one. So never was it an answer that was directly to, wait a minute, I'm asking a question of you as an individual. And it was never about, it was always the context, the people we love, the people around us, the connections, that they heard my question as being, how is your community? Because as it seemed to me, I thought it happened once or twice, maybe that was just whatever, but it kept happening over and over again, and it finally dawned on me. This is not a culture. This is not a culture that worships the individual. This is a culture where, like the culture of our story, where it is the collective. It is the health and the well-being of the collective that matters. So what is it, I ask you? I mean, this is a real question. What is it that you think makes you human? I had a professor in college who made my eyes roll more than once, but his answer was, a human is a featherless biped. Everyone thought that was very clever. I wanted to say, dude, you need to read more poetry, but I didn't because I was more timid in those days. What makes you human? Is it your appearance? Is it the memories of the first time you learned to cross the street, or the time when your mother forgot to make your lunch, or the trauma that you had when somebody came up to you and made you feel really scared? What if everything you and I have ever learned makes us human is wrong? What if We take the motto of Ubuntu, I am because we are. And reflect on the fact that no one exists all alone. No one can become human all alone. Remember the story of Helen Keller? It was very popular at one time. Story of this child who, without the ability to hear or to see or to speak, behaved in ways that all of those who surround her felt were out of control until this young teacher, Anne Sullivan, came. And in all the stories about Helen Keller, it was how it was this teacher's techniques that reached her. The teacher who knew how to teach speech and the teacher who knew how to teach this. But what if it was Annie Sullivan's love and her willingness to be human with the little girl? What if that's what it was? And all the techniques that we use to say to one another, this is me, I'm a human. Maybe none of those matter as much as the ability to just be connected. Just be connected. The reason, well, you probably don't need me to tell you the reason I'm asking this question, but the fact is, we say many things about it, many reasons about why we come to church or to a religious community, what brings us here, and at the end of the day, maybe this is just the best laboratory for becoming human. The place where maybe people will notice if you don't drive a Prius or a Subaru, but really that's not the most important thing. That was funny, by the way. Where we practice being human, which is something we can't do alone. You can practice being human all by yourself in a pew. You practice being human better. And here's the question about iChurch. If we practice being the kind of human that our country's history has taught us to be, the self-reliant individual, we miss out. So I'm going to share a direct quote. I don't usually do that because it means I usually have to go through my papers to find it, but Ralph Waldo Emerson is a big hero in our faith, and full disclosure, I'm not a big fan of his for all kinds of reasons. Emerson relinquished his Unitarian ministry and ended up making a lot of money as a lecturer, but here's what he wrote, one of his most famous essays about self-reliance, and this is a direct quote. The doctrine of hate must be taught as the counteraction of the doctrine of love as it pules and winds. I shun mother, father, wife, and child when my genius calls me. Really? Your genius, Ralph? I make no secret of my feelings about that. Did you create the language that you use to communicate these things? Did you create the roads you walk on, or the shoes that you wear, or the leather that came from animals? Did you create them? Why? What makes you think you are complete in yourself and incomplete? What makes you think that no one around you matters when your genius calls you? Mr. Emerson, did you ever think that these words and these doctrines that you shared would one day lead to the practice of eugenics and the practice of killing and eliminating inferior people? Sometimes I say things like this in Unitarian Universalist circles, and people go, but he was against slavery. He talked a lot against slavery. And I say, but he was a stone-cold racist. He hated the idea of slavery, but he had no personal connection with the people whose lives were determined and shaped by the practice of chattel slavery. We can be angry at ideas, but we're not making community unless we're connected to the people whose lives are shaped by those ideas. You hearing me? It's different. I can rail against the former president, and I still rage when I think of that image of him throwing paper towels at the people of Puerto Rico in the wake of Hurricane Maria. I found out in Puerto Rico last week that not only did he throw paper towels, he threw bags of rice at people's heads. That's not connecting. I refuse to connect with the people impacted because they're not human enough. That's our history, my friends. The history of our country, and I want to ask us, is that our history now? George Washington freed the enslaved people he owned at his death, but he sure wanted their labor as long as he needed it. Our country and our faith, in many ways, was based on glorifying the individual's needs. So I invite us this morning to remember, or to think about, and to ask yourself, do I know in the deepest part of my being, in the deepest part of my body, do I know that I am connected to every other, not only every other human, but every piece of ground I stand on, every breath of air I take, every plant I cultivate or admire in the wild? You can forget that if your circle of connection is small. When the Reverend Fred Muir talked about iChurch, he said, you know, people, my beloved fellow Unitarian Universalists, by the year 2042, white people will be the minority in this country. You know that makes the radical right crazy. Are we prepared? Are we living into that incredible and beautiful expansion of what it means to be human in our pews and in our towns and on our roads? Reverend Muir said, our faith will die if it continues to be iChurch. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Our faith will be empty if we don't embrace the seventh principle before the first. Look around you. Maybe look at somebody you don't know and smile. That means some of you might need to get up for a moment. Spiritual growing pains are part of this journey, my friends. No transformation, no journey toward beloved community, toward true interdependence is going to come easily and without sacrifice and without change. without fierce music and trying things and failing and trying more things and making connections. Remember the young people who spoke with us a few weeks ago? They need us to do better. Because only when we're connected to the people whose islands are being submerged by rising sea levels, when we're connected to the people who are dying at the border because of cruel and vindictive policies, only when we're connected will we truly be fully human. And being fully alive and fully human does not require having the right ideas. It requires a heart that is bursting with love and hope. Be damned, Waldo Emerson. Amen. Ashe. And blessed be.